Hey, what's up, guys? Today I am going to be walking you through my ranking for my top 5 favorite Dune characters. But be warned, spoilers are ahead. I will be spoiling in some detail all of Frank Herbert's books and probably going into Brian Herbert's addition into the story. But before I get started with my top 5, I have to give an honorable mention to Baron von Harkonnen, our lovely, evil individual who doesn't seem to want to die throughout the entire series. He always seems to kind of be popping back up in various forms and fashions, Golans, mind plagues, whatever you can say. The Baron is always down to ruin and destroy the Atreides. All right, starting off, number 5. I had to put a lot of thought into this one, I think. My top ones are secure, but my number 5 really kind of plagued me a little bit, and I decided that I had to go with my favorite Nabe, Stilgar. Kwisatz. Stilgar is really an interesting character in the whole Dune universe. There's something uniquely fascinating about watching Stilgar, who started out as a very strong and unique leader amongst the Fremen, turn into a complete, devoted follower and then fall into a kind of a bureaucratic stooge. And watching Stilgar's slow demise in Dune Messiah and a little bit of parts of Dune is really kind of a sad tragedy that I think Frank Herbert really wanted to take people on with the Stilgar train there. It is interesting, though, that Stilgar did really have a kind of a reckoning with himself in Children of Dune, and I think that really kind of strengthens his character, that eventually, after it was all said and done, he realized his mistakes and maybe the mistakes of the past that Paul led him on. That's number 5, Stilgar. Number 4 was also kind of tricky because originally when I first started reading the series and from the movie, I would have ranked this individual much higher, but I feel like as I continued to read the series and as I finished reading Brian Herbert's addition to the story, this character fell a couple of places for me, not because of anything that the character particularly did that I found egregious, but I just kind of felt like he kind of lacklusterly stumbled his way through the Dune verse, and that has to go to Duncan Idaho. I think the idea of Duncan Idaho being a Golan over and over and over again is kind of like the notion that he really just woke up, slept throughout thousands of years of the Dune history. I would have preferred that something a little more monumental have been the reason why Leto kept bringing him back and forth, and I guess it's a little hinted at in Brian's. I found that having Duncan at the end of the whole series be the ultimate Kwisatz Haderach felt somewhat misplaced. I'm sure Frank was taking the story there, but I feel like how they handled it in the final book, Duncan kind of just stumbled upon it, and I think at the end, instead of making a harder choice, he kind of just chose like the happy dance of like everybody be friends, and I didn't appreciate that, and I kind of felt like the lessons that Frank was teaching in his books didn't pay off particularly well with Duncan Idaho. Next up, number 3. I'm kind of going to cheat a little bit, but this particular character, number 3, is Bashir Miles Tegg, who also is a kind of double for our Leto Atreides, so I'm kind of pairing the two together because I think they are quite similar. But I have to say, Miles Tegg is one of the most interesting characters in the Duneverse simply because of his unique abilities, which I guess later Duncan would also have. But I think it was something to see actually the Atreides gene, or this Kwisatz Haderach gene, be demonstrated in a more physical way with Tegg's ability to essentially have super speed. Or slow time. I would imagine it's a little more on the super speed side of it, but it's an interesting addition to what Frank was using, especially in Heretics of Dune. I think Miles Tegg is by far the most interesting character in Heretics of Dune, and I think his ending on Dune with Dune's destruction was kind of poetic, and I really appreciated a lot of what Miles stood for, and a lot of how he played the game with the Bene Gesserit, similar to his ancestor Paul. But I really like that Miles tended to be a kind of a foil for the Bene Gesserit in a way, and he was able to hinder them in a way that only he could. He truly was a heretic of Dune. So number 2, this particular individual, I wouldn't have said they were my favorite. Upon reflection, I think when I look back at the books that are my favorite, it's usually the books with this particular character in it, and that has to be Lady Jessica. I think Lady Jessica has to be one of the coolest characters in all of Dune. She stands out amongst everyone else because while everybody's playing political games and political intrigue and this kind of Game of Thrones amongst the Landstrat, Jessica is one of the interesting characters that is motivated mostly by love for Leto, love for Paul, and in some respects I think even love for the Bene Gesserit, and I think that's what makes her really truly the ultimate heretic of Dune. Spoiler. For me, Jessica has to be kind of like, I would say, the heart of the story, and I know it sounds strange that she obviously was in some respects kind of the reason why Paul launched or was forced to launch a holy war. But I really do think Jessica, especially later on down the story when Brian gets his hands on it, you can really see her motivation shine through. All right, drumroll number 1. I don't think this is going to come to as a shock to anyone, but my favorite character is Paul Muad'Dib Atreides. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, the best character in Dune, in my opinion. He is really an interesting character, I think, because, and I think the movie does a good job of showing that this character was dragged into this prescient Kwisatz Haderach, this Harkonnen awakening that would eventually lead him to launch a holy war and wage war against all these kingdoms. Obviously, Paul's a complicated character because I think if we were to judge him from like a historical perspective, we would deem him a monster. And at least in some extent, I think Leto also would be considered a monster, but I think if you zoom out and you appreciate what the whole story of Dune was Paul and Leto, and I guess Duncan Idaho, were they not the saviors of humanity against all the foils and foibles of the universe? I think they were really at the center of it, probably the key to humanity's survival, especially Leto, building off of what Paul had already constructed. I think Paul's a great cautionary tale. I think what Frank Herbert constructed was truly a cautionary tale about following leaders, these charismatic leaders, down paths of total annihilation and holy war. And I think Paul is that captivating character because you are rooting for Paul. You are rooting for him to win. You are rooting for him to get the bad guys right at the end, until you realize that the script was flipped and there were no good guys in the story. And I think that's what makes Paul Atreides a unique character. But I think also, adding on to his, I tend to think Paul Atreides dies in Dune Messiah as he walks off into the desert, and that's the end of Paul Atreides, because when you see him again, he is the preacher, and he is a completely different character, a character that rejects a lot of what Paul Atreides did, and certainly preaches against it. Interestingly enough, Paul is undone by his own religious creations, which, again, quite poetic. It is nice that Brian Herbert gave Muad'Dib a happy ending. I think it's a unique addition to his story, but I think it's probably one of my favorites, is that Brian Herbert did give Paul a happy ending, and I think that, for me, is beneficial. But anyway, guys, those are my top 5 Dune characters, with our Baron as a honorable mention. Let me know what you think. Let me know who your top 5 characters are. As always, thanks much. Bye.